So this is a short video about the lack of logic in a lot of the forecasting landscape project descriptions that we see. And a lot of them take the same shape. And I'm going to say it's a kind of McKinsey-like shape of seeming very rational, very logical, but making almost no sense. And they often proceed in these stepwise fashions, which is to do an assessment of what's around today. So trends that are around today. And then you pick some, and you pick a selection of those, and then you extrapolate them out for a few years, and then you really look and see what that looks like in a few years' time, and then you make your decisions based on that subset of trends. Now, first of all, let's attack the first thing. So could you ever, if you tried today, find a good way of assessing all of the trends? You're going to miss some, and trends have different shapes. Some are short-term trends, some are hard trends, some are soft trends. So let's assume that you could even do that you could even collect all of the trends together, or even all of the molecules, because that's the other way that this process tends to get abused. So you do that, and then you project forward, or you pick this subset. How do you pick the subset? What are the criteria for choosing the subset? Is it really the ones that are the most important? Well, again, you're making judgments on importance today and also importance in the future. So let's assume that you've done both of those things really well, which is you've been exhaustive with your trend assessment, and that you've been really good with picking your subset of trends. The next question then comes is, do you know a way of extrapolating trends? Because it's a problem most people struggle with for most of time, which is how do you take today's trend and extrapolate it forward, even by a year or 2 years or 5 years into the future. If that's a hard trend or a soft trend, if that's a short-term trend or a long-term trend, those things will have very different extrapolation curves, and your likelihood of being right has also diminished. And even when you get there, the chance that this describes a future in which you need to design against, well, of course it doesn't. It tells you a lot about what might happen, but it doesn't really tell you what you should do in response. So that kind of thinking, I think, misses the kind of essential challenge of thinking about how to differentiate going forwards, which is it's up to you to take something to a market and say, well, actually, this is how the market might respond to what we do, rather than those things. So go back to that process. So even if you're right on your trend selection, even if you're right on your subset, even if you are right on the ability to extrapolate, even if you're right in saying actually this describes the future, it still doesn't tell you anything about what you need to do. And a really good example would be if you took the checkpoint inhibitors, and if you've seen this curve, you'll have seen it a lot when we talk about it. You go back to, let's say, 2010, and you were to try to imagine the relative success of any of the checkpoint inhibitors in this space. Well, there's nothing intrinsic to the molecules that could have told you how they would differentiate, even if you knew that they were going to arrive at the market at different times. The shape of the Opdivo and the Keytruda curves here would not have been predictable from anything that you could have done, because it wasn't about the molecule. It was about choices that were made next to biomarkers, next to positioning, next to indication selection, and so forth. Knowing that being third or fourth to market would have this degree of impact would have also been very hard to know. So any trend forecasting that you might have done within the checkpoint inhibitor space would have missed the nuance of what actually happened. So unless you're planning to put that kind of detail in, it isn't simply about launch date. It isn't simply about the indication that was chosen. The ability to forecast becomes essentially a hard problem in this space. So I want you to think the next time you address this essential problem of forecasting forwards, which is think about all the places that you could make a mistake in something like that, and whether the mistakes that you've made are more important than the information that you gather on the way through. Knowing that something seems logical, if you've missed something out, and that small thing that you missed out in the beginning can be the most important thing going forwards. Just think about how many people forecast the pandemic back in 1819. So the ability to project and and base decisions on that stuff seems logical, isn't, but of course it does tend to produce an awful lot of work for the folks who sell it to you in the first place.